Marcus Thompson looked at the clock on his desk. It was already 6:30 in the evening. The courthouse was quiet now. Most people had gone home hours ago. He closed the thick law book he had been reading and rubbed his tired eyes. The day had been long and difficult. Marcus was a judge at the county courthouse. He had been doing this job for 8 years now. Before that, he had worked as a lawyer for 12 years. People respected him. Other judges asked for his advice. Lawyers knew he was fair and honest. Today, he had heard many cases. There was a man who had stolen money from his company, a woman who had not paid her taxes, 2 neighbors fighting over a fence. Each case needed careful thinking. Marcus always tried to be fair to everyone who came to his courtroom. At 52 years old, Marcus had seen many things in his life. He had grown up in a poor neighborhood. His mother had worked 2 jobs to pay for his school. His father had left when Marcus was 10 years old. Life had not been easy, but Marcus had studied hard. He had gotten good grades. He had won a scholarship to college and then to law school. Now he was one of the most important judges in the county. He owned a nice house in a good neighborhood. He had a successful career. But Marcus knew that outside his courtroom, some people still looked at him differently. They saw his dark skin before they saw his achievements. Marcus put his papers in his briefcase and stood up. His black robe hung on a hook behind his desk. He would need it again tomorrow. There were always more cases to hear, more decisions to make, more people who needed justice. He walked through the empty halls of the courthouse. His footsteps echoed on the marble floor. The building was old and grand. Marcus felt proud to work here. Every day he tried to make sure the law was fair for everyone. Marcus pushed open the heavy front doors and walked to the parking lot. The evening air was cool. Fall was coming. The leaves on the trees were starting to change colors. Red, orange, and yellow mixed together like a painting. His car was a simple gray sedan. It was 5 years old but still ran well. Marcus was not the type of person who needed expensive things to feel important. He cared more about doing good work than showing off. As he drove away from the courthouse, Marcus thought about his family. His wife, Sarah, was a teacher at the local elementary school. She would be making dinner now. Their daughter, Lisa, was away at college studying to be a doctor. Their son, David, was in his last year of high school. He wanted to be a lawyer like his father. Marcus felt grateful for his life. He had worked hard to get where he was, but he also knew he had been lucky. Many smart people never got the chances he had gotten. That was why his work as a judge was so important to him. He wanted to make sure everyone got a fair chance in his courtroom. The drive home took Marcus through different neighborhoods. First, he passed the business district with its tall office buildings and busy restaurants. Then he drove through older residential areas with small houses and big trees. Finally, he reached the newer part of town where he lived. This neighborhood was different from where Marcus had grown up. The houses were bigger, the lawns were perfectly cut. Most of the people who lived here were white and wealthy. Marcus was one of only 3 black families on his street. When Marcus had first moved here 8 years ago, some neighbors had been cold to him and Sarah. They would smile politely but never really talk. A few had even asked if he was sure he could afford to live there. Marcus had shown them his judge identification card, and their attitudes had changed quickly. Now most of his neighbors were friendly. They raved when they saw him. They invited him and Sarah to neighborhood parties. Their children played with David when he was younger. But Marcus still felt like he had to prove himself in ways his white neighbors never did. As Marcus drove down Maple Street toward his house, he noticed a police car parked at the corner. The officer inside was writing something on a clipboard. Marcus had seen this officer before. His name was Derek Hayes. Marcus remembered him from a case that had come before his court 2 years ago. Officer Hayes had arrested a young black man for supposedly selling drugs. But the evidence had been weak. The arrest had seemed suspicious. Marcus had dismissed the case because Hayes had not followed proper procedures. The officer had not been happy about that decision. Marcus drove past the police car slowly and carefully. He always drove exactly at the speed limit in this neighborhood. He always stopped completely at stop signs. He never gave anyone a reason to pull him over. Even though he was a judge, Marcus knew that some police officers might not care about that if they saw him driving at night. Officer Hayes looked up as Marcus drove by. Their eyes met for a moment in the rearview mirror. Marcus felt a small chill run down his back. Something about the way Hayes looked at him seemed unfriendly, but Marcus kept driving. He was almost home now. The streetlights were starting to come on. Windows and houses glowed warm and yellow. Marcus could smell someone cooking dinner, maybe barbecue. It made him hungry. He hoped Sarah had made his favorite chicken and rice. As Marcus turned onto his street, he checked his rearview mirror again. The police car was no longer at the corner. Good. He was tired and just wanted to get home to his family. Marcus pulled into his driveway and turned off the engine. His house looked warm and welcoming. The porch light was on. He could see Sarah moving around in the kitchen through the window. She was probably finishing dinner. He sat in his car for a moment and took a deep breath. Another day was ending. Tomorrow there would be more cases, more decisions, more people counting on him to be fair and just... But for now, he was just a man coming home to his family. Marcus grabbed his briefcase and got out of his car. He walked up the front steps and opened the door. The smell of home cooking filled the air. Sarah called out from the kitchen. "Marcus, is that you? Dinner is almost ready?" "Yes, it's me," Marcus called back. "I'll be right there." He hung up his coat and loosened his tie. The day was over. He was home. He was safe. Soon he would be sitting at his dinner table with his wife, talking about their day, planning for tomorrow. Marcus had no idea that in a few minutes his peaceful evening was about to change completely. Officer Derek Hayes sat in his patrol car watching the gray sedan drive away. He knew that car. He had seen it around the neighborhood before. A black man driving through this expensive area always caught his attention. Hayes believed people should stick to their own neighborhoods. Hayes had been a police officer for 15 years. He thought he was good at his job. He could spot trouble from a mile away. And in his mind, a black man driving through this wealthy white neighborhood at night was definitely trouble. Hayes remembered the driver too. 2 years ago, this same man had somehow gotten his drug arrest thrown out of court. The judge had said Hayes had not followed the rules properly. That had made Hayes angry. He had done everything right, but some liberal judge had let a criminal go free. Hayes started his patrol car and began following the gray sedan. He stayed back far enough so the driver would not notice him right away. Hayes had done this many times before. He would follow suspicious people until they made a mistake. Everyone made mistakes eventually. The sedan turned onto Oak Street. Hayes followed. The driver was being very careful. He stopped completely at the stop sign. He used his turn signal. He drove exactly at the speed limit. This made Hayes even more suspicious. In his experience, only people with something to hide drove this carefully. Hayes radioed to dispatch. "Unit 247 here. I'm following a suspicious vehicle in the Maple Heights area. Gray sedan, license plate." He read the numbers and letters into his radio. The dispatcher's voice crackled back. "Copy that, 247. Do you need backup?" "Not yet," Hayes replied. "Just keeping an eye on things." Hayes had gotten 3 complaints filed against him in the past 5 years. All 3 had come from black citizens who said he had treated them unfairly. Each time, the police department had investigated and found no wrongdoing. Hayes was careful about that. He knew how to do his job without crossing lines that would get him in real trouble. The sedan turned left onto Pine Avenue. Hayes followed, staying 2 car lengths behind. The neighborhood here was even more expensive. Houses cost $500,000 or more. Hayes lived in a small apartment across town. He had always wondered how some people could afford places like this while he struggled to pay his bills on a police officer's salary. Hayes watched as the sedan approached a small pothole in the road. The driver slowed down and moved slightly to the left to avoid it. For just a moment, the car's tire touched the white line that divided the lanes. That was all Hayes needed. Hayes hit his lights and siren. The red and blue lights flashed across the dark street. The siren whooped twice. Hayes felt a familiar rush of excitement. This was the part of his job he enjoyed most. The moment when he took control, the driver of the sedan immediately put on his turn signal and pulled over to the side of the road. Hayes noted that the car stopped in a safe spot under a streetlight, another sign that the driver knew what he was doing. Most innocent people panicked when they got pulled over. Hayes parked his patrol car behind the sedan. He sat for a moment watching. The driver had turned on his interior light and put both hands on the steering wheel where Hayes could see them. Hayes had to admit this guy knew the routine. Hayes called dispatch again. Unit 247, I've initiated a traffic stop on Pine Avenue. Gray sedan for crossing the center line. Copy, 247. Do you need backup? Hayes thought about it. He usually did these stops alone. But something told him this might be different. Send one unit, just in case. Unit 183 is en route to your location. Hayes got out of his patrol car and approached the sedan. He kept his hand near his weapon, just like they had taught him in training. You never knew what might happen during a traffic stop. Even in a nice neighborhood like this. As Hayes got closer, he could see the driver more clearly. It was a black man, probably in his 50s. He was wearing a suit and tie. He looked calm and professional. But Hayes knew that appearances could be deceiving. Hayes tapped on the driver's window with his flashlight. The window rolled down immediately. Good evening, officer, the driver said politely. His voice was calm and educated. May I ask why? You stopped me? Hayes shined his flashlight into the car. The interior was clean and neat. There was a briefcase on the passenger seat. No obvious signs of drugs or weapons. But Hayes was not ready to let his guard down. License and registration? Hayes demanded, without answering the man's question. Of course, the driver replied. He moved slowly and carefully, reaching for his wallet. I'm going to get my license from my wallet now. Hayes watched every movement. The man pulled out a leather wallet and removed his driver's license. Then he reached over to the glove compartment. I'm getting my registration from the glove box, the man said before opening it. Hayes appreciated that the driver was announcing his movements. It showed he understood police procedures. But it also made Hayes more suspicious. Why did this guy know so much about traffic stops? The man handed over his license and registration. Hayes looked at the documents with his flashlight. The name on the license was Marcus Thompson. The address was in this neighborhood. The registration matched the car. Mr. Thompson, Hayes said, purposely not using any respectful title. Do you know why I stopped you tonight? Marcus Thompson looked confused. No, officer, I don't. I was driving very carefully. You crossed the center line back there? Hayes said. That's a traffic violation. I moved slightly to avoid a pothole. Thompson explained calmly. I don't believe I actually crossed into the other lane. Hayes did not like being contradicted, even politely. Are you arguing with me, Mr. Thompson? No, sir. I'm just explaining what happened. Hayes heard another patrol car approaching. Unit 183 was arriving as backup. Good. Hayes always felt more confident when he had another officer with him. Officer. Jenny Martinez got out of the second patrol car. Hayes had worked with Martinez before. She was young and usually followed his lead. Hayes waved her over. What's the situation? Martinez asked quietly. Suspicious driver, Hayes replied. Cross the center line. Something doesn't feel right about this guy. Martinez looked at the sedan. Everything seemed normal to her. The driver was being cooperative. But she trusted Hayes's experience. Hayes walked back to the driver's window. Mr. Thompson, I need you to step out of the vehicle. May I ask why? Thompson asked. Routine safety check, Hayes lied. Please step out of the car now. Thompson hesitated for a moment. Hayes could see him thinking. Finally, Thompson turned off his engine and slowly got out of the car. Thompson was tall and well-dressed. His suit looked expensive. His shoes were polished. He carried himself with confidence, but not in an arrogant way. He looked like a businessman or maybe a lawyer. Please put your hands on the roof of the car, Hayes ordered. Thompson did as he was told, but Hayes could see the frustration in his eyes. Officer, I don't understand what's happening here. I was just driving home from work. Where do you work, Mr. Thompson? Hayes asked. Downtown, Thompson replied. That's pretty vague, Hayes said. What kind of work do you do downtown? Thompson paused. Hayes could tell he was choosing his words carefully. I work in the legal field, Hayes smiled. He had caught the man in what might be a lie. Legal field? Like what? A paralegal? Court clerk? Something like that, Thompson said quietly. Hayes was getting excited now. This guy was definitely hiding something. Maybe he was a criminal who had been to court recently. That would explain why he seemed familiar and why he knew police procedures so well. Martinez watched the interaction with growing concern. She had been trained to look for signs of racial bias in traffic stops. This stop was starting to feel wrong to her. But Hayes was her senior officer, and she did not want to cause problems. Hayes began searching Thompson's car. He looked under the seats, in the glove compartment, in the trunk. He was hoping to find drugs, weapons, or stolen property. Anything that would justify this stop and prove his suspicions were correct, but the car was clean. Thompson kept it neat and organized. There was nothing illegal or even suspicious inside. Hayes was becoming frustrated. This stop was not going the way he had hoped. Thompson was too calm, too polite, too prepared. It made Hayes angry. Nice car for someone in your line of work, Hayes said sarcastically as he finished searching. I've worked hard for what I have, Thompson replied evenly. I bet you have, Hayes said with a sneer. Tell me, Mr. Thompson, do you live around here? Yes, I do. Really? This is an expensive neighborhood. Houses here cost a lot of money. Thompson did not respond. He kept his hands on the car and stared. Straight ahead. Hayes was just getting started. He had Thompson right where he wanted him, humiliated and powerless. Now the real fun could begin. Officer Hayes walked around Marcus Thompson's car one more time. He was looking for any excuse to make this stop bigger than it needed to be. The small violation of touching the center line was not enough. Hayes wanted something more dramatic. Mr. Thompson, Hayes said loudly, I'm going to need to see some more identification. Marcus kept his hands on the roof of his car. He turned his head slightly to look at Hayes. I gave you my driver's license and registration. What other identification do you need? Don't get smart with me, Hayes snapped. I asked the questions. Here, Officer Martinez shifted uncomfortably. She had been watching this traffic stop for 10 minutes now. Nothing about it seemed right. The driver was being completely cooperative. There was no real reason to keep him here this long. Hayes noticed a few neighbors had come out of their houses. Word was spreading that something was happening on Pine Avenue. A couple of people had their phones out, probably taking pictures or videos. This annoyed Hayes, but he was not going to let civilians tell him how to do his job. Mr. Thompson, Hayes continued, I need you to put your hands behind your back. Marcus finally showed some emotion. His eyes widened in surprise. Are you arresting me for what? I didn't say you were under arrest, Hayes replied. I said put your hands behind your back. It's for officer safety. Marcus slowly moved his hands behind his back. Hayes quickly put handcuffs on him. They were tight, too tight. Marcus winced but did not complain. Martinez stepped forward. Hayes, what are you doing? He hasn't done anything that requires handcuffs. Hayes glared at his partner. I'm the senior officer here, Martinez. I decide what's necessary for our safety. An older white woman came out of her house across the street. She recognized Marcus as her neighbor. Mrs. Patterson had lived on Pine Avenue for 20 years. She knew Marcus was a respected member of the community. Excuse me, officers, Mrs. Patterson called out. That's Judge Thompson. He lives right down the street. Hayes pretended not to hear her, but Marcus felt a small surge of hope. At least someone was willing to speak up for him. Hayes leaned close to Marcus. So you're telling people you're a judge now? That's a good story. What are you really? Some kind of criminal pretending to be important? Marcus took a deep breath. He had been in situations like this before, though not often since becoming a judge. He knew that staying calm was his best chance of getting through this safely. Officer Hayes, Marcus said quietly. I am Judge Marcus Thompson of the County Superior Court. You can verify this by calling the courthouse or checking my identification. Hayes laughed out loud. Right, and I'm the President of the United States. You think I'm stupid, Mr. Thompson? More neighbors were coming outside now. Word was spreading quickly through the neighborhood. Someone had called the situation into the local news. A reporter was already on her way. Martinez pulled Hayes aside. Listen, what if he really is a judge? This could be a huge problem for us. He's not a judge, Hayes said firmly. Look at him. Does he look like a judge to you? Martinez looked at Marcus Thompson. He was well-dressed, well-spoken, and clearly educated. He actually did look like he could be a judge. Maybe we should just check his story. We're not checking anything, Hayes said angrily. I'm in charge of this stop, and I say he's lying. Hayes walked back to Marcus. Mr. Thompson, I'm going to search you now. Do you have any weapons, drugs, or anything sharp that might hurt me? No, officer, I have nothing like that. Hayes began patting down Marcus roughly. His hands were not gentle. He was hoping to make Marcus angry or scared. But Marcus remained calm and dignified. Even with handcuffs cutting into his wrists, a young man with a smartphone had positioned himself where he could see everything clearly. He was recording the entire interaction. Hayes noticed this and became even more aggressive. Hey, Hayes shouted at the young man. Get back, this is police business. I'm on public property, the young man replied. I have a right to record. Hayes was getting frustrated. Nothing was going according to his plan. Thompson was not acting guilty. The neighbors were supporting him. People were recording everything. This was supposed to be a simple traffic stop where he taught someone a lesson about respecting authority. Hayes decided to try a different approach. Mr. Thompson, I smell marijuana coming from your car. I'm going to need to do a thorough search. Marcus knew this was a lie. He had never used drugs in his life. He did not even drink alcohol very often. Officer, there are no drugs in my car. You will not find anything. We'll see about that, Hayes said with a nasty smile. Hayes opened all the doors of Marcus's car. He pulled out the floor mats. He dumped out the contents of the glove compartment. He searched under every seat again. He even looked in the spare tire compartment. Martinez watched with growing alarm. Hayes was destroying Marcus's car for no good reason. She had never seen him act this aggressively during a routine. Traffic stop. Mrs. Patterson called out again from across the street. Officers, I've lived here for 20 years. Judge Thompson is a wonderful neighbor. He's never caused any trouble. His wife Sarah teaches at my granddaughter's school. Hayes ignored her completely. He was too focused on trying to find something. Anything that would justify his actions. After 20 minutes of searching, Hayes had found nothing illegal in Marcus's car. No drugs, no weapons, no stolen property. The car was exactly what it appeared to be, the vehicle of a law-abiding citizen, but Hayes was not ready to give up. He had gone too far to back down now. If word got out that he had harassed an innocent man for no reason, there could be consequences for his career. Mr. Thompson, Hayes said, I'm not satisfied with your identification. I think you might be using false documents. Marcus felt a cold fear growing in his stomach. This officer was clearly determined to create problems, no matter what the truth was. Officer, my identification is completely legal and accurate. I have additional identification in my briefcase if you need to see it. Additional identification? Hayes said with interest. What kind of additional identification? Marcus hesitated. He carried his courthouse identification card in his briefcase. It clearly showed his position as a superior court judge, but he was worried that showing it might make Hayes even more angry and unpredictable. I have my work identification, Marcus said carefully. Get it, Hayes ordered. Marcus looked down at his hands, which were still cuffed behind his back. I can't reach my briefcase like this. Hayes roughly turned Marcus around and unlocked one handcuff, but he kept the other cuff attached to Marcus's left wrist. Now get your identification and move slowly. Marcus reached into his briefcase with his free hand. His fingers found his courthouse ID card. This was the moment that would change everything. But Marcus had no way of knowing what Hayes would do when he saw the truth. The small crowd of neighbors had grown to about 15 people. They were all watching and waiting to see what would happen next. Several of them were recording everything on their phones. Marcus pulled out his courthouse identification card. It was an official laminated card with his photo and title clearly visible. He handed it to Officer Hayes. Hayes looked down at the card. His face went completely white. The card read, Judge Marcus Thompson, County Superior Court, Criminal Division. For a moment, Hayes said nothing. He just stared at the card, reading it over and over again. Martinez saw the change in Hayes's expression and moved closer to see what was on the card. When Martinez read the identification, her heart sank. They had just spent 30 minutes harassing a superior court judge. This was the kind of mistake that could end careers and cost the city millions of dollars in lawsuits. The neighbors who had been watching started to murmur among themselves. They could see that something had changed. Hayes looked like he had seen a ghost. Marcus stood quietly, still wearing one handcuff, watching Hayes's face. He could see the exact moment when the officer realized what a terrible mistake he had made, but Marcus also knew that this moment could go one of two ways. Hayes could admit his error and try to make things right, or he could become dangerous and try to cover up his mistake by making the situation even worse. Marcus waited to see which choice Officer Hayes would make. Officer Hayes stared at the courthouse identification card in his hand. The official seal gleamed under the streetlight. Judge Marcus Thompson, County Superior Court, Criminal Division. The photo matched the man standing in front of him perfectly. Hayes's mind raced. This was impossible. How could this black man be a real judge? Judges were supposed to be important people. Powerful people. People like the white politicians and lawyers Hayes had grown up seeing on television. But then Hayes remembered something. 2 years ago, he had arrested a drug dealer named Tony Martinez. The case had been thrown out by some liberal judge who sighed. Hayes had not followed proper procedures. Hayes had never seen that judge's face clearly in the courtroom, but the name on the dismissal papers had been Judge Marcus Thompson. Now Hayes realized he was looking at that same judge. The one who had embarrassed him in court. The one who had let a criminal go free. Hayes felt his anger growing even stronger. Instead of backing down, Hayes decided to double down on his aggressive approach. He was not going to be intimidated by some piece of plastic, even if it looked official. This could be fake, Hayes announced loudly, holding up the ID card. Anyone can make fake identification these days. Marcus felt his heart sink. He had hoped that showing his credentials would end this nightmare. Instead, Hayes seemed determined to make things worse. Officer Martinez grabbed Hayes by the arm and pulled him aside. Derek, what are you doing? She whispered urgently. That ID looks completely real. If he really is a judge, we're in serious trouble. Hayes shook off her grip. He's not a real judge, Jenny. He's just some con man with a good fake ID. Trust me on this. But what if you're wrong? Martinez pleaded. I'm not wrong, Hayes said firmly. I've been doing this job for 15 years. I know a criminal when I see one. Hayes walked back to Marcus, who was still standing with one handcuff on his wrist. The crowd of neighbors had grown to about 20 people now. Some of them were holding up phones, recording everything. A few were talking quietly on their phones, probably calling friends and family to tell them what was happening. Mr. Thompson, Hayes said in a mocking tone, or should I say, Your Honor? Hayes laughed at his own joke. This identification card you've shown me could be purchased at any store that makes fake IDs. I'm not impressed. Marcus looked directly into Hayes's eyes. Officer Hayes, I suggest you contact the courthouse right now. Call the main number and ask them to verify my identity. This can all be cleared up in 5 minutes. I don't take suggestions from suspects, Hayes replied coldly. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly neighbor, had been watching from across the street. She could not stand what she was seeing any longer. She walked over to the police officers. Excuse me, she said firmly. I'm Dorothy Patterson. I've lived in this neighborhood for 20 years. I know Judge Thompson personally. He and his wife, Sarah, have been our neighbors for 8 years. He really is a judge. Hayes turned to face Mrs. Patterson. His face was red with anger. "Ma'am, I need you to step back. This is official police business. I will not step back," Mrs. Patterson said bravely. "I'm watching you abuse an innocent man, and I won't stand for it." Hayes took a step toward Mrs. Patterson. For a moment, it looked like he might arrest her too, but Martinez quickly stepped between them. "Mrs. Patterson," Martinez said gently, "we appreciate your concern, but please let us handle this situation." Marcus watched this exchange with growing worry. Hayes was clearly out of control. The situation was spiraling beyond just a simple traffic stop. Other innocent people were now at risk. Hayes radioed for more backup. "Unit 247 requesting additional units at Pine Avenue and Oak Street. I have a potentially dangerous situation here." "Copy, 247. What's the nature of the danger?" Hayes looked at Marcus with hatred in his eyes. "Suspect is being uncooperative and making false claims about his identity. Neighbors are interfering with official police business." Marcus could not believe what he was hearing. Hayes was completely lying to the dispatcher. But Marcus knew that if more police officers arrived and heard Hayes's version of events first, things could get much worse. A third police car arrived within minutes. Officer Robert Chun got out and approached Hayes and Martinez. Chun was a veteran officer with 20 years of experience. He was known for being calm and professional. "What's going on here?" Chun asked. Hayes quickly explained his version of events. "I stopped this guy for crossing the center line. He's been giving me attitude and claiming to be some kind of judge. He's got a fake ID and everything. The neighbors are trying to interfere with the arrest." Chun looked around the scene. He saw Marcus standing calmly with one handcuff on. He saw the scattered contents of the car that had been searched. He saw the angry crowd of neighbors. Something about Hayes's story did not add up. "Has the suspect been violent or threatening?" Chun asked. "No," Martinez answered honestly before Hayes could speak. "He's been completely cooperative." Hayes shot Martinez an angry look. He did not appreciate her honesty. Chun walked over to Marcus. "Sir, what's your version of what happened here?" Marcus spoke clearly and calmly. "Officer, I was driving home from work when Officer Hayes pulled me over. He said I crossed the center line, which I did not do intentionally. I was avoiding a pothole. I have provided all requested identification, including my driver's license and my work identification. I have been completely cooperative throughout." This stop. Chun looked at the courthouse ID card that Hayes was still holding. Even from a distance, it looked legitimate to him. The seal, the photo, the official format, it all looked real. "Officer Hayes," Chun said, "have you verified this identification?" "It's fake," Hayes insisted. "I'm sure of it." Chun took the ID card from Hayes and examined it closely. He had seen courthouse identification before. This one looked completely authentic. The cardstock was the right weight. The lamination was professional quality. The seal had the correct details. "This looks real to me," Chun said quietly to Hayes. "You're wrong," Hayes replied stubbornly. Chun was starting to understand what was really happening here. Hayes had made a mistake and was too proud to admit it. But Ching also knew that if they had really been harassing a superior court judge, the consequences would be severe for everyone involved. A local news van pulled up at the end of the street. A reporter and cameraman got out and began setting up their equipment. Word about the traffic stop had spread beyond the neighborhood. Hayes saw the news crew and panicked. If this story got on television, his career would be over. He had to find a way to justify his actions or make Marcus look guilty of something. "I think this suspect might be under the influence of drugs," Hayes announced loudly. "I'm going to request a field sobriety test." Marcus was shocked. "Officer, I have not been drinking or using any drugs. I don't even drink alcohol." "That's what they all say," Hayes replied with a sneer. Chun stepped forward. "Hayes, I don't see any signs of impairment. His speech is clear. He's standing normally. His eyes are not bloodshot." But Hayes was beyond listening to reason. He was committed to his course of action now, regardless of the consequences. "Mr. Thompson," Hayes said, "I'm placing you under arrest for driving under the influence." possession of false identification, and interfering with a police investigation. The crowd of neighbors gasped. Mrs. Patterson started crying. Marcus felt the second handcuff snap around his wrist, but Officer Chun had heard enough. He knew this arrest was completely unjustified. And he was not going to let his department get sued into bankruptcy because of Hayes's ego and prejudice. It was time for someone to take control of this situation before it got any worse. Officer Chun watched in disbelief as Hayes put the second handcuff on Marcus Thompson. This situation had gone completely out of control. Chun had been a police officer for 20 years, and he had never seen a fellow officer act this recklessly. "Hayes, stop what you're doing right now," Chun said firmly. Hayes looked up in surprise. "What are you talking about? I'm making an arrest." "No, you're making a huge mistake," Chun replied. "And I'm not going to let you destroy all of our careers." Chun walked over to his patrol car and opened the laptop computer mounted on the dashboard. If Marcus Thompson really was a judge, there would be records. Official databases that would prove his identity beyond any doubt. "What are you doing?" Hayes demanded. "I'm checking this man's identification properly," Chun answered. "Something you should have done an hour ago." Chun typed Marcus Thompson's name into the court system database. Within seconds, a detailed profile appeared on the screen. Judge Marcus Thompson, County Superior Court, Criminal Division, 8 years of service. Law degree from State University. Previously worked as a prosecutor and defense attorney. The profile included a recent photograph that clearly matched the man standing in handcuffs on Pine Avenue. There was no doubt about it. Hayes had arrested a sitting Superior Court judge. For absolutely no valid reason, Chun felt sick to his stomach. This was going to be a disaster for everyone involved. The department would face lawsuits. The city would have to pay millions in damages. Officers would lose their jobs. All because Hayes could not admit he had made a mistake. "Hayes," Chun called out, "come here, now." Hayes walked over to the patrol car reluctantly. He could tell from Chun's expression that something was wrong. Chun turned the laptop screen so Hayes could see it clearly. "Look at this." Hayes stared at the official court records. His face went from red to pale white in seconds. The photograph on the screen was definitely Marcus Thompson. The credentials were real. The man Hayes had been harassing for the past hour was actually one of the most powerful legal officials in the county. "This can't be right," Hayes whispered. "It's right," Chun said grimly. "You just arrested a Superior Court judge. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Officer Martinez had been watching from a distance. When she saw Hayes's reaction, she knew the truth had finally come out. She walked over to see the computer screen for herself. Martinez read the information and felt her heart drop into her stomach. She had tried to warn Hayes multiple times, but he would not listen. Now they were all going to pay the price for his stubbornness and prejudice. The news reporter at the end of the street had finished setting up her camera. She was broadcasting live to the local television station. Thousands of people were now watching this traffic stop unfold in real time. "This is Rebecca Martinez reporting live from Pine Avenue," the reporter said into her microphone. "We're watching a very unusual police situation involving what appears to be a routine traffic stop that has escalated dramatically." Marcus stood quietly between the police cars, still wearing handcuffs. He could see the officers gathered around the laptop computer. He could see their shocked expressions. He knew they had finally discovered the truth about his identity, but Marcus also knew that this was a dangerous moment. Hayes had gone too far to simply back down and apologize. Officers who made mistakes this big sometimes tried to cover them up by making the situation even worse. Mrs. Patterson approached Officer Chun carefully. "Excuse me, officer. I've been trying to tell your colleague that Judge Thompson is exactly who he says he is. Maybe now you'll listen to me." Chun looked at the elderly woman with respect. "Ma'am, I apologize for how you and your neighbor have been treated tonight. This should never have happened." "Then why don't you take those handcuffs off him right now?" Mrs. Patterson demanded. Chun wanted to do exactly that. But Hayes was still the senior officer on the scene. Protocol required that Hayes make the decision about releasing Marcus. Even though Hayes had clearly lost all credibility, Hayes stood frozen next to the patrol car. His mind was racing through possible explanations and excuses. Maybe the database was wrong. Maybe this was all some kind of elaborate setup. Maybe Marcus Thompson was impersonating a real judge, but deep down, Hayes knew the truth. He had let his prejudices and his ego destroy his career. He had humiliated an innocent man because of the color of his skin, and now everyone was going to know about it. Chun made a decision. He could not wait for Hayes to come to his senses. Too much damage had already been done. "Officer Hayes," Chun said officially, "I am taking command of this situation. As the senior officer with the most experience, I am invoking Department Protocol Section 4.7 regarding officer misconduct during active incidents." Hayes looked at Chun in shock. "You can't do that." "Yes, I can," Chun replied firmly. "And I am." "Step away from the suspect immediately." Chun walked over to Marcus. The judge looked tired and frustrated, but still maintained his dignity despite everything that had happened to him. "Sir, I want to personally apologize for how you have been treated tonight," Chun said. "I am going to remove these handcuffs immediately, and I want you to know that Officer Hayes' actions do not represent the values of our police department." Chun unlocked the handcuffs and helped Marcus rub his wrists where the metal had cut into his skin. Marcus was finally free after more than an hour of harassment and humiliation. "Thank you, Officer Chun," Marcus said quietly. "I appreciate your professionalism." Chun handed Marcus his driver's license, registration, and courthouse identification card. "All of your documents are in order, Your Honor. You are free to go." But Marcus did not immediately get in his car and drive away. He looked around at the crowd of neighbors who had witnessed everything. He looked at the news cameras that had recorded the entire incident. He knew that this moment would have consequences far beyond just this one traffic stop. Hayes stood by himself next to his patrol car. He could feel everyone staring at him. The neighbors, the other officers, the news crew, they all knew what he had done. His 15-year career in law enforcement was over. Martinez approached Hayes cautiously. "Derek, we need to talk about what happens next." Hayes looked at her with desperation in his eyes. "Jenny, you have to help me figure out how to fix this." Martinez shook her head sadly. "There's no fixing this, Derek. You arrested a judge for no reason. You ignored his identification. You lied to dispatch about him being dangerous. This is going to be investigated by Internal Affairs, the FBI, and probably the Department of Justice." The reality of his situation finally hit Hayes like a physical blow. He was not just going to lose his job. He was probably going to face criminal charges, civil rights violations, deprivation of rights under color of law, false imprisonment. The federal penalties for what he had done could include years in prison. Officer Chun was making notes in his official report. He knew this incident would be studied and analyzed for years to come. It would be used as an example of how not to conduct police work. It would cost the city millions of dollars and damage the reputation of every honest officer on the force. Marcus finally spoke to the crowd of neighbors and reporters. "Ladies and gentlemen, what happened here tonight should concern all of us. This was not just about me. This was about how we treat each other as human beings, regardless of our race or position in society." The crowd listened intently to Marcus's words. Even in this moment of personal humiliation, he was still acting like a judge, still trying to teach important lessons about justice and equality. Hayes realized that his life as he knew it was over. But Marcus Thompson was just getting started. This incident was going to change everything for both of them, but in very different ways. Officer Hayes stood alone beside his patrol car, watching his career disappear before his eyes. The computer screen still showed Judge Marcus Thompson's official profile. Every detail confirmed what Hayes had refused to believe. The photograph, the credentials, the years of service, it was all real. Hayes felt a strange mix of emotions washing over him. Anger at being proven wrong. Fear about what would happen to his job. Embarrassment at being exposed in front of so many witnesses. But underneath it all was a growing realization that he had done something truly terrible. For 15 years, Hayes had told himself that he was one of the good guys. He fought crime. He protected innocent people. He kept the community safe. But tonight he had been the criminal. He had been the one terrorizing an innocent person. Officer Chun finished removing Marcus's handcuffs and stepped back respectfully. "Your Honor, is there anything else I can do for you? Do you need medical attention? Would you like us to call someone for you?" Marcus rubbed his wrists where the handcuffs had been. There were red marks on his skin, but nothing serious. "Thank you, Officer Chun. I'm fine physically. But I am very concerned about what happened here tonight." Chun nodded grimly. "As am I, sir. I want you to know that this incident will be fully investigated. Officer Hayes will face serious consequences for his actions." Marcus looked over at Hayes, who was still standing by his car in shock. For a moment, Marcus felt something unexpected. Pity. Hayes had just destroyed his own life because of his prejudices and pride. It was a tragic waste. Mrs. Patterson approached Marcus with tears in her eyes. "Judge Thompson, I am so sorry about what happened to you. This is not the kind of neighborhood we want to be." "Mrs. Patterson," Marcus said gently, "you have nothing to apologize for. You spoke up when it mattered. You showed courage and decency. That says everything about the kind of neighborhood this really is." Other neighbors began approaching Marcus to offer their support and apologies. Many of them had never spoken to him before tonight, but now they wanted him to know they did not approve of how he had been treated. A middle-aged man named Robert Kim stepped forward. "Judge Thompson, I recorded most of what happened on my phone. I'll be happy to provide that video to anyone who needs it for the investigation." "I got it all on video too," said a young woman named Lisa Chun. That officer was completely out of line from the very beginning. Marcus was surprised and touched by the neighbors' support. He had always felt somewhat isolated in this community, never quite sure if he was truly welcome. But tonight had shown him that most of his neighbors were good people who believed in fairness and justice. The news reporter, Rebecca Martinez, approached Marcus with her cameraman. "Your Honor, would you be willing to make a statement about what happened tonight?" Marcus considered the question carefully. As a judge, he was usually very careful about speaking to the media, but this was different. This was about more than just him. "Yes," Marcus said finally. "I think it's important for people to understand what really happened here." The camera rolled as Marcus faced the reporter. Behind him, the flashing lights of the police cars lit up the quiet suburban street. Neighbors gathered around to listen. "Tonight I was driving home from work when I was pulled over by Officer Hayes," Marcus began. "I was immediately treated with suspicion and hostility, despite being completely cooperative. Officer Hayes refused to believe my identification was real. He handcuffed me, searched my car without cause, and arrested me on false charges." Marcus paused and looked directly into the camera. "This happened to me even though I am a superior court judge, but the important thing to understand is that it could happen to anyone. What Officer Hayes did tonight was wrong, regardless of who I am or what position I hold." Hayes watched the news interview from beside his patrol car. Every word Marcus spoke was like a nail in the coffin of his career. But Hayes also knew that everything Marcus was saying was true. Officer Martinez approached Hayes cautiously. She had been his partner for 2 years, and she had never seen him act this way before. "Derek," she said quietly, "I have to ask you something. Why did you do this? Why didn't you just check his identification when he first showed it to you?" Hayes looked at Martinez with tired eyes. For the first time all night, he seemed to really think about her question. "I don't know," Hayes said finally. "I saw a black man driving through this neighborhood, and I just assumed he didn't belong here. When he said he was a judge, I couldn't believe it. I thought he was lying to me." "But why?" Martinez pressed. "What made you so sure he was lying?" Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that surprised even himself. "Because I didn't think a black man could really be a judge. I know that sounds terrible, but that's the truth. I looked at him and I saw what I expected to see, not what was really there." It was the first honest thing Hayes had said all night, and it was the most damning admission he could have made. Officer Chun overheard Hayes's confession. He walked over and looked Hayes directly in the eyes. "Derek, do you realize what you just said? You just admitted to racial profiling. You targeted Judge Thompson because of his race, not because of anything he did wrong." Hayes nodded slowly. "I know, I screwed up everything. My career is over." "Your career is the least of your problems," Chun replied. "You violated Judge Thompson's civil rights. You falsely imprisoned him. You filed false charges. The FBI is going to investigate this as a hate crime." The reality of his situation was finally sinking in for Hayes. This was not just about losing his job. He was probably going to prison. Meanwhile, Marcus finished his interview with the news reporter. Several neighbors thanked him for his calm and dignified response to what had happened. A few asked if there was anything they could do to help. "The best thing you can do," Marcus told them, "is to remember what you saw tonight. Remember that this can happen to anyone. And speak up when you see injustice, just like Mrs. Patterson did." Marcus walked back to his car, which was still a mess from Hayes's aggressive search. His papers and belongings were scattered everywhere. The floor mats had been thrown on the ground. It would take time to clean up the damage, but as Marcus began gathering his things, he realized that something important had happened tonight. Yes, he had been humiliated and violated. But he had also discovered that his community was full of people who would stand up for what was right, and Officer Hayes had finally been forced to confront the truth about his own prejudices. It was a painful lesson, but perhaps a necessary one. As Marcus drove home to his family, he knew that this night would change many things. For Hayes, it would mean the end of his career and possibly his freedom. For the police department, it would mean investigations, lawsuits, and demands for reform, but for Marcus, it would mean something different. It would mean using his position and his experience to make sure that what happened tonight never happened to anyone else again. The real work was just beginning. Marcus Thompson finally arrived home at nearly 10 o'clock that night. What should have been a 10-minute drive from the courthouse had turned into a 3-hour nightmare. His wife Sarah was waiting by the front door, her face filled with worry. "Marcus, what happened?" Sarah asked as soon as she saw him. "I saw the news report. Are you okay?" Marcus hugged his wife tightly. After everything he had been through, holding Sarah felt like coming back to safety. "I'm okay physically," he said. "But it was pretty bad, Sarah, really bad." Sarah had recorded the news coverage on their television. They sat together on the couch and watched the footage of Marcus being handcuffed and searched on their own street. Sarah cried as she saw her husband being treated like a criminal by Officer Hayes. "I can't believe this happened to you," Sarah said through her tears. "And right here in our own neighborhood." "The worst part," Marcus said, "is that this happens to other people all the time. They just don't have courthouse identification cards to prove who they are." Marcus's phone had been ringing constantly since he got home. News reporters wanted interviews. Fellow judges were calling to offer support. Civil rights lawyers were volunteering to represent him in lawsuits against the police department. But the most important call came from Police Chief Robert Anderson. Marcus and the chief had worked together on several community policing initiatives over the years. They respected each other professionally. "Marcus," Chief Anderson said when Marcus answered the phone, "I just watched the news footage. I'm absolutely horrified by what happened to you tonight. I want you to know that Officer Hayes has been suspended immediately pending a full investigation." "I appreciate that, Chief," Marcus replied, "but suspension isn't enough. What Hayes did tonight was criminal. He violated my civil rights. He falsely imprisoned me. He filed fraudulent charges." Chief Anderson sighed heavily. "You're absolutely right. Hayes will face criminal charges. The FBI has already contacted us about opening a federal civil rights investigation, and our Internal Affairs Division will conduct a complete review of all his previous cases." "What about Officer Martinez?" Marcus asked. "She tried to stop Hayes several times, but she didn't do enough." "Martinez will face disciplinary action for failing to intervene," Chief Anderson replied. "But her punishment will be much less severe than Hayes's. At least she recognized that something was wrong." After hanging up with the chief, Marcus called His son David at college. David was studying criminal justice and wanted to be a police officer after graduation. The news of his father's arrest had reached him through social media. "Dad, are you okay?" David asked. "I saw the videos online. I can't believe that cop did that to you." "I'm fine, son," Marcus said. "But this experience has taught me some important lessons, and I think it should change how you think about becoming a police officer." "What do you mean?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "David, there are many good police officers who do their jobs with honor and integrity. Officer Chun showed that tonight. But there are also officers like Hayes who let their prejudices control their actions. If you become a cop, you'll have the power to be either type of officer." "I want to be one of the good ones, Dad." "Then you'll need to be brave enough to stop the bad ones," Marcus said. "Officer Martinez tried, but she didn't do enough. Good cops have to be willing to stand up to bad cops, even when it's difficult." Meanwhile, across town, Officer Hayes sat in his apartment staring at the television. Every local news channel was covering the story. The footage of him handcuffing Judge Thompson played over and over again. Social media was exploding with outrage. About the incident, Hayes's phone kept ringing, but he was afraid to answer it. His supervisor had already called to tell him he was suspended. His union representative had called to discuss legal representation. Several reporters had called wanting his side of the story, but Hayes knew there was no good side to his story. He had let his racial prejudices turn a simple traffic stop into a civil rights violation. He had humiliated an innocent man because of the color of his skin. There was no excuse for what he had done. Hayes thought about his own family. His wife? Linda worked as a nurse at the local hospital. His daughter Jessica was a senior in high school, planning to attend college next year. How would this scandal affect them? Would Jessica be embarrassed to have him as a father? Would Linda lose her job because of the negative publicity? The next morning, the story had spread far beyond the local news. National media outlets picked up the footage of Judge Thompson's arrest. Civil rights organizations issued statements condemning Hayes's actions. Politicians called for police reform. Judge Thompson arrived at the courthouse that morning to find a crowd of supporters waiting for him. Fellow judges, court employees, lawyers, and community activists had gathered to show their solidarity. "Judge Thompson," called out Maria Gonzalez, a defense attorney who had appeared in Marcus's court many times, "we want you to know that the entire legal community stands behind you." District Attorney James Wilson stepped forward. "Marcus, what happened to you last night was an attack on our entire justice system. When a police officer can arrest a sitting judge without cause, it threatens the rule of law itself." Marcus was moved by the support, but he also felt a heavy responsibility. "Thank you all for being here," he said to the crowd. "But I want everyone to remember that this isn't just about me. Police misconduct affects people in our community every day. Most of them don't have the resources or platform that I have to fight back." Inside the courthouse, Marcus met with his fellow judges to discuss how to respond to the incident. Judge Patricia Roberts, the chief judge, had called an emergency meeting. "Marcus," Judge Roberts said, "the Judicial Council has unanimously voted to request a federal investigation into the police department's practices. We believe Hayes's behavior indicates systemic problems that go beyond just one officer." Judge Michael Chun, Officer Chun's brother, spoke up. "I've reviewed some of Hayes's previous arrests. There's a clear pattern of targeting minority defendants, with questionable charges that were later dismissed." Marcus nodded. "That's exactly what I suspected. Hayes didn't just wake up yesterday and decide to become a racist cop. He's probably been doing this for years." The investigation that followed was extensive and shocking. FBI agents reviewed Hayes's arrest records going back 5 years. They found dozens of cases where Hayes had arrested Black and Hispanic citizens on charges that were later dropped. Traffic stops that escalated unnecessarily. Search warrants based on false information. Testimony that contradicted video evidence 3 other officers who had worked with Hayes were also suspended pending investigation. It became clear that Hayes was not acting alone, but was part of a culture of racial bias within certain units. of the police department, Officer Martinez was interviewed by federal investigators. She admitted that she had witnessed Hayes make racially inappropriate comments in the past, but had never reported them. She was demoted and transferred to a different unit, but kept her job because she cooperated fully with the investigation. The city council held emergency hearings about police reform. Community groups that had been complaining about police bias for years suddenly found politicians willing to listen to their concerns. Judge Thompson's arrest had given credibility to accusations that had previously been ignored. For years, we've been telling people that this kind of thing happens in our community, said Reverend William Jackson, a local civil rights leader. Nobody believed us until it happened to a judge. But this is the reality that ordinary black and brown citizens face every day. Marcus used his position to push for concrete reforms. He worked with community leaders to develop new police training programs focused on implicit bias and de-escalation. He advocated for body cameras on all officers and civilian oversight of police misconduct investigations, but Marcus also knew that real change would take time. Changing police culture and addressing systemic racism would require sustained effort from many people over many years. 1 month after the incident, Officer Derek Hayes was formally charged with federal civil rights violations, false imprisonment, and filing false police reports. He faced up to 10 years in prison if convicted on all counts. Hayes eventually pleaded guilty to avoid a trial. He was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison and banned from ever working in law enforcement again. His pension was revoked, and he was required to pay financial damages to Judge Thompson, but for Marcus, Hayes's punishment was less important than the larger changes that were beginning to happen. The incident had sparked a conversation about race and justice that was long overdue, and Marcus was determined to use his influence to make sure that conversation led to real reform. 6 months after that terrible night on Pine Avenue, Judge Marcus Thompson stood before a packed auditorium at the police academy. He was there to speak to new recruits about constitutional rights and police accountability. It was part of a new training program that had grown out of his experience with Officer Hayes. The young men and women in the audience listened carefully as Marcus told his story. He did not speak with anger or bitterness. Instead, he talked about the importance of treating every citizen with dignity and respect, regardless of their race or social status. When Officer Hayes pulled me over that night, Marcus said, he made assumptions about who I was based on the color of my skin. He saw a black man in an expensive neighborhood and decided I must be a criminal. That kind of thinking is not just morally wrong, it's also dangerous for police officers. Marcus paused and looked around the room. Police work is about protecting and serving all citizens equally. When you let prejudice guide your decisions, you lose the trust of the community. And without community trust, you cannot do your job effectively. After his speech, several recruits approached Marcus with questions. A young Hispanic woman named Rosa Martinez asked, "Judge Thompson, how do we make sure we don't make the same mistakes Officer Hayes made?" Marcus smiled at the thoughtful question. First, you have to be honest about your own biases. We all have them. The key is recognizing them and not letting them control your actions. Second, you have to be willing to speak up when you see fellow officers acting inappropriately. Officer Martinez tried to warn Hayes, but she didn't do enough to stop him. Young black man named Jerome Washington raised his hand. "Sir, what advice do you have for minority officers who might face pressure to go along with misconduct?" "That's a difficult situation," Marcus admitted. "But remember that your badge and your oath are more important than fitting in with the group. If you see something wrong, you have a duty to report it. The community is counting on you to be better than the officers who came before you." The new training program was just one of many changes that have resulted from Marcus's arrest. The police department had implemented body cameras for all officers, created a civilian review board for misconduct complaints, and established new policies for traffic stops and searches. Chief Anderson had also promoted Officer Chun to lead a new community policing unit. Chun's professional handling of the situation that night had earned him respect throughout the department and the community. Judge Thompson's arrest was a wake-up call for all of us, Chief Anderson said during a recent interview. It forced us to confront problems we had been ignoring for too long. The changes we've made since then have improved relationships between police and the community. Officer Martinez had used her experience as a learning opportunity. After her demotion, she had enrolled in courses on cultural sensitivity and conflict resolution. She was now working to rebuild her career and her reputation. "I failed Judge Thompson that night," Martinez admitted during a community forum on police reform. "I should have done more to stop Hayes. I've learned that being a good cop means being willing to challenge bad behavior, even when it's coming from your partner or supervisor." Meanwhile, Derek Hayes was serving his prison sentence at a federal facility 200 miles away. His wife, Linda, had divorced him and moved back to her hometown with their daughter, Jessica. Hayes had lost everything: his career, his family, his reputation, and his freedom, but even Hayes's downfall had served a purpose. His case had become a teaching tool in law enforcement academies across the country. Police trainers used video footage of his arrest of Judge Thompson to show recruits exactly what not to do during a traffic stop. Judge Thompson had also used his experience to push for broader criminal justice reforms. He had testified before the state legislature about the need for better police training and accountability measures. Several bills had been passed as a direct result of his advocacy. "Marcus has turned a personal trauma into a force for positive change," said Senator Elizabeth Warren during a ceremony honoring Marcus's reform efforts. "His dignity and leadership in the face of injustice have inspired people across the country." The incident had also strengthened Marcus's relationship with his neighbors. Mrs. Patterson had organized a neighborhood watch program focused on documenting police interactions. Other residents had formed a community group to address racial bias and promote understanding. "Judge Thompson showed us all what grace under pressure looks like," Mrs. Patterson said during a neighborhood meeting. "But more importantly, he showed us that we can't just stand by when we see injustice. We all have a responsibility to speak up." Marcus's son David had graduated from college and been accepted to the police academy. The experience of seeing his father arrested had not discouraged David from pursuing law enforcement. Instead, it had motivated him to become the kind of officer who would prevent such incidents from happening. "Dad's arrest showed me both the worst and the best of policing," David said. "Officer Hayes represented everything wrong with police culture, but Officer Chun showed what good policing looks like. I want to be like Officer Chun." Marcus's daughter Lisa had finished medical school and was now a resident at the local hospital. She often spoke to community groups about the health impacts of police violence and racial discrimination. "What happened to my father was traumatic for our whole family," Lisa explained during a medical conference. "But it also opened our eyes to experiences that many families in our community face regularly. As healthcare providers, we need to understand how police encounters affect our patients' physical and mental health." The legal settlement between Marcus and the city had been substantial, but Marcus had donated most of the money to civil rights organizations and police reform initiatives. He did not want to profit from his suffering. Instead, he wanted to make sure his experience led to meaningful change. "Money can't undo what happened that night," Marcus explained to reporters. "But it can be used to prevent similar incidents in the future. That's the best use of these funds." 1 year after his arrest, Marcus returned to Pine Avenue for a community event celebrating the police reforms that had been implemented. The same neighbors who had witnessed his humiliation now gathered to honor his leadership and resilience. Officer Chun was there too, representing the new community policing unit. He and Marcus had developed a professional friendship based on mutual respect. Judge Thompson could have responded to what happened with anger and demands for revenge, Chun said to the crowd. Instead, he chose to work for positive change. He turned a moment of injustice into an opportunity for progress. Marcus addressed the gathering with characteristic humility. "What happened to me that night was wrong, but it was also educational. It taught all of us important lessons about prejudice, power, and the need for accountability in law enforcement." He looked around at the diverse crowd of neighbors, police officers, and community leaders. "The real victory is not that officer Hayes went to prison. The real victory is that we used this experience to build a better relationship between police and the community. We turned a moment of division into an opportunity for unity. As the sun set over Pine Avenue, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since that difficult night. The street looked the same, but the community was different, stronger, more united, more committed to justice and equality. Marcus knew there was still work to be done. Changing deeply rooted systems and attitudes would take years, maybe decades. But he also knew that progress was possible when people were willing to confront uncomfortable truths and work together for change. The boy who had grown up poor and faced discrimination throughout his life had become a man who used his position and influence to make the world more just. And the police officer who had let prejudice destroy his career had become a cautionary tale that would teach future generations about the importance of treating all people with dignity and respect. Sometimes justice comes slowly. Sometimes it requires patience and persistence. But Marcus Thompson had proven that one person's courage and grace in the face of injustice could create ripples of positive change that spread far beyond any single incident or community. The work of building a more just society would continue. One conversation, one training session, one policy change at a time, and Marcus would be there leading by example, showing others that it was possible to transform pain into purpose and injustice into progress. In the end, Officer Hayes had been wrong about more than just Marcus's identity. He had been wrong to think that power could be used to intimidate and humiliate without consequences. He had been wrong to believe that prejudice could masquerade as police work. And he had been wrong to assume that his actions would go unchallenged, because he had indeed pulled over the wrong man, not because Marcus was a judge, but because Marcus was someone who would not let injustice stand unchallenged. Someone who would use his experience to make sure that what happened to him would happen to fewer people in the future. And that, perhaps, was the most important lesson of all.